I wasn't supposed to touch him again. 3 years ago, his father fired me for one hug, called it inappropriate cultural behavior. But as I watched Kim June collapse in that hospital hallway, all I could think was, he's dying, and I'm the only one who knows why. The sterile white walls of Seoul General Hospital's emergency room blurred around me as I dropped to my knees beside the unconscious 8-year-old boy. His small body was convulsing, foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. Every instinct I had screamed at me to act, but my hands froze above his chest. Someone help him. His father's voice cracked across the corridor, raw with panic I'd never heard from the composed CEO before. 3 years. 3 years since I'd held this child, sung him to sleep, been the only person who could calm his meltdowns. 3 years since Kim Hyun-woo had looked at me with disgust instead of gratitude and told me I was culturally inappropriate for his son. But June was dying. And I was still the only person in this hospital who knew his secret. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe to Mystic Tale by Luna, where stories like this reveal the secrets families try to bury. The medical team rushed past me like I was invisible. White coats, rapid movements, urgent voices speaking medical terms that most people wouldn't understand. But I understood every word. And what I heard made my blood turn to ice. Get me 50 milligrams of methylphenidate, stat, the head doctor barked to his nurse. My heart stopped. They were about to kill him. Wait. I lunged forward, grabbing the doctor's wrist before he could inject the medication. You can't give him that. The entire emergency room went silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me, the black woman in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt who had dared to touch a doctor. Ma'am, step back immediately. The doctor's voice was sharp with authority. This is a medical emergency. I know what this is. My voice came out steadier than I felt. And I know that medication will stop his heart in 3 minutes. Kim Hyun-woo appeared beside me, his expensive suit wrinkled from running. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw the flicker of recognition cross his face. The same man who had once trusted me with his most precious thing. The same man who had destroyed my world with 6 words, "Your services are no longer needed." Ada. His voice was barely a whisper. The head doctor looked between us, impatience radiating from every line of his body. Sir, do you know this woman? Hyun-woo's jaw tightened. I could see the war playing out behind his dark eyes. Acknowledge me and validate my intervention, or maintain the boundaries he'd set 3 years ago and let the doctors proceed. She. He stopped, uncertainty flickering across his features. I was his foster mother, I said quietly, never taking my eyes off June's still form. For 2 years, I took care of him. And I know things about his medical history that aren't in any file. The doctor's grip tightened on the syringe. Ma'am, unless you're a licensed medical professional. The boy has a rare genetic mutation, I interrupted, my voice growing stronger. COMT gene deletion. It affects how his body processes dopamine. That medication you're holding? It'll send him into cardiac arrest. The room fell silent except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. I could feel every person in that emergency room staring at me, trying to understand how a Nigerian woman with calloused hands and bargain store clothes could speak their medical language. But it was Hyun-woo's stare that burned the deepest. How do you know that? His voice was raw, vulnerable in a way I hadn't heard since the night June was first diagnosed with autism and he'd cried in my kitchen. I looked down at the child who had called me Mama Ada for 2 years. The same child his father had pulled from my arms because his grandmother whispered that African women brought bad spirits into Korean homes. Because, I said softly, I'm the one who discovered it. The heart monitor's beeping suddenly accelerated. June's small body began to seize again, more violently this time. The medical team sprang back into action, but now they hesitated with the medication, uncertainty creeping into their professional confidence. What do we give him then? The head doctor demanded. I knelt beside June again, my hands finally steady. Move aside. And trust me. For 3 years, I had been just another face in the crowd. Another fired domestic worker with no voice, no power, no right to speak in spaces like this. But as I placed my hands on June's fevered forehead and began the intervention that would save his life, I felt something shift in the air around us. Hyun-woo was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. The medical staff stepped back, giving me space they wouldn't normally give to someone like me. And June, even unconscious, seemed to respond to my touch. Juna, I whispered, using the affectionate term I'd been forbidden to say for 3 years. Mama is here. His seizure began to slow. That's when I knew this day would change everything. Not just for June, not just for his father, but for me. Because sometimes the people who love us most are the ones we're taught to push away. And sometimes, love refuses to stay buried. The silence in that emergency room stretched like a held breath. June's seizure had stopped, but his small chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven rhythms. The medical team stood frozen, watching me work with a mixture of confusion and reluctant respect. His pulse is stabilizing, the head doctor announced, his voice carefully neutral. But we still need to understand what's happening here. I kept my hands on June's forehead, feeling the fever breaking under my touch. 3 years of separation hadn't erased the connection between us. His body still recognized my presence, still responded to the calm energy I'd learned to project during his worst moments. Ma'am. The doctor's voice was softer now, professional curiosity replacing his earlier authority. You mentioned a genetic mutation. Are you in the medical field? Before I could answer, Hyun-woo stepped closer. His expensive leather shoes clicked against the hospital floor, each step measured and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old wounds. She was my son's caregiver, he said quietly. 2 years ago. The words hung between us like a bridge neither of us was ready to cross. I could feel his eyes on me, searching for answers to questions he'd never thought to ask before firing me. Questions that might have changed everything. 2 years. The doctor looked between us, trying to piece together a puzzle with missing pieces. And you're aware of his medical history? I straightened slowly, my hands finally leaving June's now peaceful face. I know more about this child than anyone in this room. It wasn't a boast. It was a statement of fact that tasted like heartbreak in my mouth. The memory hit me without warning, sharp and immediate as a blade. 2 years and 8 months ago, standing in the marble lobby of Kim Enterprises, clutching a folder of references and trying not to let my nervousness show. Back then, Hyun-woo had been different. Desperate, actually. Dark circles under his eyes, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his hands shaking slightly as he reviewed my qualifications. He'd just gone through his 3rd nanny in 6 months, and June's autism was manifesting in ways that terrified him. He doesn't sleep, Hyun-woo had told me that first day, vulnerability cracking his CEO facade. He screams when people touch him, but then he hurts himself when he's alone. The doctors keep changing his diagnosis, and I don't know how to help him. I'd seen it before in other children I'd fostered. The lost look, the overwhelming sensory input, the desperate need for someone who understood that love sometimes looked like patience instead of solutions. Children like June need consistency, I'd told him, my voice gentle but confident. They need someone who won't try to fix them, just accept them. He'd hired me that same day. Miss Okafor? The doctor's voice pulled me back to the present. Can you tell us more about this genetic condition? I glanced at Hyun-woo, whose face had gone very still. He knew I'd never mentioned genetic testing during my time as June's caregiver. He knew because he'd never authorized any. It's complicated, I said carefully. Uncomplicated. Hyun-woo's voice carried his old authority, but underneath it, I heard something that sounded almost like pleading. The heart monitor beeped steadily beside us. June was stable now, but the questions hanging in the air felt more dangerous than his medical crisis. When I cared for June, I began slowly. I noticed patterns. Reactions to certain foods, behaviors that didn't match typical autism presentations. Small things that most people wouldn't connect. It was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was buried in research papers and medical journals I'd spent months studying after I'd been forced to leave him. The whole truth lived in specialist consultations I'd sought using my own money and connections I'd never told Hyun-woo I had. "You're talking about medical observations," the doctor said, his interest clearly piqued. "Do you have training in pediatric care?" Another loaded question. Another truth that would reshape everything Hyun-woo thought he knew about the woman he dismissed as just another domestic worker. "I have experience with children who have complex needs," I said, choosing my words like stepping stones across dangerous water. Hyun-woo's eyes narrowed. What kind of experience? The question I'd been dreading. The one that would force me to reveal exactly how much I'd hidden from him, and why. The kind that taught me to recognize when a child is being slowly poisoned. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread to every corner of the room. Hyun-woo's face went white. "What did you just say?" I looked down at June, sleeping peacefully now, his features relaxed in a way they rarely were when he was conscious. Beautiful child. Damaged child. Child who'd been failed by every adult who was supposed to protect him. "Your mother," I said quietly, "was giving him supplements. Traditional remedies, she called them. To help with his behavioral problems." Hyun-woo's jaw tightened. "Those were herbal vitamins. Harmless. Harmless to most children," I agreed. "But not to a child with COMT gene deletion. Not to a child whose brain processes dopamine differently than everyone else's." The doctor stepped forward, his attention fully captured now. "You're suggesting systematic medication errors?" "I'm suggesting that someone who loved this child very much was unknowingly making him sicker." I met Hyun-woo's eyes directly. And when I tried to explain that, I was told I was overstepping cultural boundaries. The memory of that final confrontation still burned. His mother's accusations about African superstitions corrupting her grandson. His own desperate need to choose between his child's well-being and his family's approval. The way he'd looked at me when he'd made his choice. "You never said anything about genetic testing," Hyun-woo said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You never asked why I spent so much time reading medical journals in my spare time." Another silence. This one heavy with the weight of assumptions and missed opportunities. "Ma'am," the doctor interjected gently, "these are serious allegations. If you suspected medical interference, there are protocols. Protocols that require proof," I finished. Proof I couldn't get without access to the child. Access that was revoked when I suggested the supplements might be causing harm. Hyun-woo's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You think I chose wrong?" "It wasn't a question. I think you chose what you thought was best for your family," I said honestly. "I think you were scared and overwhelmed and trying to balance too many competing needs. But your son almost died today because the people treating him don't know his complete medical history. And I'm the only person who does." The heart monitor continued its steady rhythm. Around us, the emergency room had returned to its normal chaos, but our small circle remained locked in this moment of truth. Hyun-woo stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing everything I'd revealed. The medical knowledge I'd demonstrated. The genetic condition I'd identified. The systematic poisoning I'd tried to prevent. The woman he'd fired for caring too much. "What else don't I know about you?" he asked quietly. I looked down at June one more time, sleeping peacefully under the harsh hospital lights. The child I'd loved like my own. The child I'd lost because love sometimes requires sacrifices that destroy the people making them. More than you're ready to hear, I said. The hospital administrator appeared at my shoulder like a ghost materializing from white walls. Her clipboard clutched against her chest, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked between Hyun-woo and me with the practiced neutrality of someone who'd witnessed too many family dramas in sterile corridors. Mr. Kim? Her voice was crisp, professional. I need to speak with you about your son's medical records. Hyun-woo turned away from me, his relief at the interruption palpable. What about them? We have some inconsistencies. She glanced at me, then back at him. There's a consultation request from pediatric neurology. They're asking for Dr. Okafor's input on the genetic testing protocols. The world tilted sideways. Hyun-woo's face went blank with confusion. Dr. Okafor? The administrator's eyes found mine, recognition dawning in her expression. Dr. Adaora Okafor. You're the pediatric neurologist who's been consulting on complex autism cases, aren't you? My throat closed. 3 years of carefully constructed distance, 3 years of hiding in plain sight, unraveling in a single moment. The words wouldn't come. Wait. Hyun-woo's voice cut through my paralysis like a blade. Did she just call you doctor? The administrator looked between us, clearly sensing she'd stepped into something complicated. Dr. Okafor is one of our most respected consultants. Her work on genetic factors in autism spectrum disorders has been groundbreaking. The silence that followed felt like falling off a cliff. Hyun-woo stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not confusion, but something deeper. Something that looked like betrayal mixed with wonder. You're a doctor, he said slowly. A pediatric neurologist. Yes. And you let me hire you as a nanny. Yes. Why? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with 3 years of misunderstanding. Behind him, I could see medical staff pretending not to eavesdrop on what was clearly becoming a very public revelation. If you're feeling that same shock I felt, subscribe to Mystic Tale by Luna. Because what happened next changed everything we thought we knew about family, love, and the choices we make to protect the people we love most. Because, I said quietly, your son needed someone who understood his brain, not someone who wanted to fix it. Hyun-woo's hands shook as he processed this information. You gave up practicing medicine to be my son's caregiver? I took a leave of absence. A leave of absence. He repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. From a medical career. To change diapers and make snacks and deal with my family's complaints about your cooking. When he put it like that, it did sound insane. Your son was dying, I said simply. Slowly, quietly, but dying. The supplements your mother was giving him were interacting with his genetic mutation in ways that would have caused permanent brain damage within months. The administrator cleared her throat softly. Dr. Okafor, perhaps we should discuss this in private. No. Hyun-woo's voice was sharp. I want to hear this. All of it. I looked down at June, still sleeping peacefully despite the chaos erupting around his bedside. He looked so small under the hospital blankets, so vulnerable. The same way he'd looked that first night when his fever had spiked and I'd stayed awake for 18 hours monitoring his vitals. 3 years ago, I was researching genetic markers in children with atypical autism presentations. Your caseworker mentioned a family struggling with a recently diagnosed child who wasn't responding to traditional interventions. Hyun-woo's breathing had gone shallow. You sought us out. I volunteered to help. I met his eyes directly. I thought it would be temporary. A few months to stabilize his condition and train you to manage his care. But you stayed 2 years. I stayed because he was getting worse, not better. Because every time I tried to explain what I was seeing, your family dismissed it as cultural differences or educational overreach. The memory of those final weeks still burned. His mother's increasing hostility, her whispered conversations about how I was corrupting June with foreign ideas. The way Hyunwoo had grown more distant as the pressure from his family intensified. "You were saving him," he said, understanding finally dawning in his voice. "This whole time, you were saving him." "I was trying to." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and the sound that emerged made my blood freeze. High heels clicking against tile, rapid movements, a voice I recognized speaking in urgent tones. Hyunwoo's mother had arrived. She swept into the emergency room like a storm front, designer handbag clutched in manicured fingers, her hair perfectly styled despite the early morning crisis. Behind her came her husband and what looked like half the family, a parade of expensive clothes and concerned expressions. "Where is my grandson?" she demanded in accented English, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on June's sleeping form. Then she saw me. The recognition hit her like a physical blow. Her face went white, then flushed red, her mouth opening and closing without sound. "You," she finally managed. "What is that woman doing here?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Every conversation stopped. Even the medical equipment seemed to hold its breath. Hyunwoo stepped between his mother and me, but his movement was uncertain, like he wasn't sure which side of the battle he belonged on. "Mother," Adaora helped June when he collapsed. "Adaora?" His mother's voice rose to near shriek levels. "You let that woman touch my grandson again? She saved his life. She poisoned our family." The accusation rang out across the emergency room, loud enough that heads turned from 3 stations away. "This African woman brought sickness into our home," filled his head with her backward ideas. "Stop." My voice cut through her tirade like a scalpel. "Just stop." She whirled to face me, fury radiating from every line of her body. "You have no right to speak to me. You are nothing. A servant who forgot her place." "I am a doctor," I said quietly. "And I know exactly what you've been giving that child." The words hit the family like bullets. Hyunwoo's father stepped forward, his face grave with concern. His sister gasped audibly. Even the youngest family members, who'd been playing with their phones, looked up in shock. "What is she talking about?" Hyunwoo's father asked his wife. His mother's face cycled through emotions, surprise, fear, defiance, and finally, desperate anger. "She's lying. Making up stories to justify her inappropriate behavior." "Ginkgo biloba," I said calmly. "Ginseng extract. St. John's wort. All in doses 3 times higher than recommended for adults, given to a 40-pound child with a genetic condition that makes him process these compounds like poison." Hyunwoo's mother went silent. "You documented every supplement," I continued, reaching into my bag and pulling out a worn notebook. "Dates, dosages, behavioral changes. I have 3 years of data showing the correlation between what you gave him and his neurological episodes." "Where did you get that information?" Hyunwoo's voice was barely above a whisper. "From the child himself." I opened the notebook, pages covered in careful handwriting and medical charts. Every time he had a seizure, every time his speech regressed, every time he hurt himself, it was within 6 to 8 hours of taking your mother's vitamins. The family stared at the notebook like it was a bomb that might explode. "But you couldn't have known about the genetic testing," Hyunwoo said, confusion still clouding his voice. "We never did genetic testing." I closed the notebook carefully. "Yes, you did." "What?" "The blood samples I took when he had that fever 18 months ago. The ones I told you were for routine screening." I met his eyes. "I had them tested for genetic markers." Hyunwoo's face went through a dozen emotions in as many seconds. "You tested my son's blood without my permission." "I tested my patient's blood to save his life." "He wasn't your patient." You were his nanny. I was his doctor pretending to be his nanny because it was the only way to protect him. The truth hung between us like a bridge on fire. Around us, his family processed this revelation in shocked silence. His mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Have you ever felt that moment when everything you believe just shatters? Tell me in the comments, because right now, I need to know I'm not the only one who's been this afraid. Dr. Okafor. The administrator's voice was gentle but firm. Perhaps we should move this conversation to a private room. No, Hyun-woo said again. His voice was stronger now, more certain. I want to hear everything. Right here, right now. I looked at his family, his mother pale with shock, his father's face grave with dawning understanding, his sister holding her children protectively closer. All of them realizing that the woman they dismissed and discarded had been the only thing standing between their beloved grandson and permanent brain damage. There's more, I said quietly. More what? I reached into my bag again, pulling out a small photograph. Faded at the edges, creased from years of handling. A young woman holding a newborn baby, both of them radiating joy despite the hospital setting. More truth about who I really am. I held the photograph so Hyun-woo could see it. And why I could never really walk away from your son. Hyun-woo took the photograph with trembling hands. His eyes moved from the image to my face and back again, recognition dawning slowly. The woman in this picture, he said slowly. She looks like me. I took a shaky breath. Because she's my sister. And that baby she's holding? I reached over and gently touched June's sleeping forehead. That's your son. The photograph fell from Hyun-woo's hands, fluttering to the hospital floor like a leaf in autumn. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Your sister, he whispered. Died giving birth to him. My voice cracked on the words I'd never spoken aloud. Complications during delivery. She was alone in Lagos, no family, no support system. Hyun-woo's mother stepped forward, her face a mask of disbelief. This is impossible. The adoption agency said his birth mother was a student. She was a student, I said firmly. Medical school. 3rd year. She was going to be a pediatrician, just like me. The family exchanged glances, their carefully constructed understanding of June's origins crumbling in real time. His father picked up the photograph, studying it with the intensity of a man trying to solve a puzzle. She looks exactly like you, he said quietly. Twins. The word came out like a confession. Born 3 minutes apart. She was older, wiser, braver. Everything I'm not. Hyun-woo found his voice again, though it sounded strangled. If she was your sister, if June is your nephew, then why? Why did I let you adopt him instead of taking him myself? He nodded, unable to form the words. I knelt beside June's bed, smoothing his hair with trembling fingers. Even unconscious, he leaned into my touch, his body recognizing the connection his mind couldn't understand. Because she made me promise, I whispered. Before she died, she made me swear that her son would grow up with the father she'd chosen for him. That he would know his heritage, his culture, his language. But you're his family, Hyun-woo's sister spoke for the first time, her voice filled with confusion. Blood family. And he's yours too. I looked up at them, this collection of people who'd loved June in their own complicated ways. She didn't want him torn between two worlds. She wanted him to belong fully to one. Hyun-woo sank into the chair beside the bed, his face buried in his hands. So you gave up your nephew. Your only family. I gave up my legal claim to him. I touched June's forehead again, feeling his fever completely gone now. I never gave up loving him. The machines around us beeped steadily, marking time in a room full of people trying to process impossible truths. Outside the windows, Seoul was waking up to another day, unaware that in this small corner of the world, everything had changed. The nanny position, Hyun-woo said suddenly, his head snapping up. You took it so you could be close to him. I took it because he was dying, and you didn't know it. I met his eyes directly. The genetic condition, the supplements, the seizures, I could see patterns you couldn't. I could help in ways no one else could. Because you're his aunt. Because I'm a doctor who happens to be his aunt. His mother, who had been silent for longer than I'd ever known her to be, finally found her voice. You let us. I said terrible things to you. About your culture, your methods, your love for him, I finished gently. I know. But you stayed. Even when we made it clear you weren't welcome, you stayed. I stayed until staying became more harmful than leaving. I looked at each of them in turn. When the choice became his emotional well-being versus his physical safety, I chose safety. And then you spent 3 years researching his condition, Hyun-woo said, understanding dawning in his voice. Learning everything you could to help him from a distance. Learning everything I could so that when this day came, and I knew it would come, I'd be ready. June stirred in his sleep, making the small sound he'd always made when transitioning between sleep cycles. Without thinking, I began humming softly under my breath, a Nigerian lullaby my sister used to sing. The effect was immediate. June's breathing deepened, his small body relaxing completely. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused but peaceful. Mama Dora, he whispered, using the name he'd called me when he was too young to pronounce Adora properly. The family gasped collectively. His mother covered her hand with her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Hello, sweet boy, I whispered back, switching seamlessly to the Igbo words I'd taught him in secret during our time together. How are you feeling? Tired, he replied in the same language, his small hand reaching for mine. But safe now. Hyun-woo stared at this exchange with wonder and something that looked like grief. He remembers. Children always remember love, I said simply. Even when adults forget how to show it. June's eyes found his father's face, and his expression brightened. Papa. Mama Dora came back. She fixed the hurt in my head. Yes, she did, Hyun-woo said, his voice thick with emotion. She fixed a lot of things. The head doctor appeared at the foot of the bed, clipboard in hand, looking between our unusual family gathering with professional curiosity. Well, this is certainly an interesting case, he said. Dr. Okafor, I've reviewed the genetic testing results you provided. The COMT deletion is indeed present, and your treatment protocol was exactly correct. He paused, looking at Hyun-woo. Your son is extremely fortunate to have someone with Dr. Okafor's expertise in his life. More fortunate than I realized, Hyun-woo said quietly. The doctor consulted his clipboard. We'll want to keep him for observation for another 24 hours, but I expect a full recovery. The important thing now is making sure he has proper medical supervision going forward. He does, I said firmly. I'll be overseeing his care personally. Hyun-woo looked at me sharply. Does that mean? It means I'm done hiding. I stood up, smoothing my wrinkled clothes, trying to find my professional composure again. It means your son deserves to have all the people who love him working together, not apart. His mother stepped forward, her face streaked with tears. Dr. Okafor, I owe you an apology. I owe you more than an apology. You owe me nothing, I said gently. You love your grandson. You wanted to protect him. You just didn't know how. But the things I said about your culture, your methods, were born from fear and misunderstanding. I touched her arm gently. The same fear that made me hide who I really was instead of trusting you with the truth. She nodded, unable to speak through her tears. June's small voice cut through the emotional moment. Are we going to be a family now? All of us together? The question hung in the air like a prayer waiting to be answered. Hyun-woo looked at me, then at his family, then at his son. I think, he said slowly, we already are. We just forgot for a while. I felt tears I'd been holding back for 3 years finally begin to fall. Your sister would be so proud, I whispered to June. She would be so proud of the boy you've become. Will you tell me about her? He asked. Every day, I promised. Every single day. Outside the hospital window, the sun was rising over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A new day beginning for all of us. Sometimes loving someone means stepping back. Sometimes it means stepping forward. But it always means putting their needs above your own fears. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, love finds a way to bring families together instead of tearing them apart. June reached for both his father's hand and mine, holding us together in his small, strong grip. Now we're complete, he said with the wisdom that only children possess. And for the first time in 3 years, I believed him.